Welcome everybody to another episode. I am so happy and excited to be welcoming Brittany today here to today's episode. Brittany, please straight go ahead, introduce yourself. Who are you? Why are you here? And what is your core mission?
Yeah, I am Brittany. I am a Canadian living in France. I've been here for 15 years, and I am an artist and entrepreneur through and through. And I really focus on visibility, messaging, storytelling. A big part of my own mission has been healing generational trauma. So I stand for women transcending generational trauma and smashing their own glass success ceiling. And yeah, my work is just about helping creative spiritual entrepreneurs really amplify their voice, vision, and visibility, and really just become fully self-expressed, deeply fulfilled, and paid for their work. And I know that sounds like a lot of buzzwords in there, but it really just comes down to those core values of like wanting your voice to be heard, feeling fulfilled, like it's not just empty success, but feeling deeply fulfilled in the work that you're doing, and also being paid.
I love that. I love that. Especially this like also being paid, but especially also this being seen. Like, I feel like this is the red thread that is coming through in the core traumas of the feminine. Of course, we have all the different kinds of traumas showing up in different personalities, be it neglect, be it abuse, be it abandonment, betrayal. Yeah. But I feel like every single woman really has this to be seen part. I personally believe it's a big part also of our society. Like, society is currently structured in a way to show up in the very same way every single day. And what I feel is the worst about that, we are expected to show up in an ovulation high vibe every single day. Yeah. Be positive, be outgoing, be friendly, not too sexy, not too expressive, not too loud, but definitely not be a gray mouse. And so I feel like there's a big part of, yes, we have to perform to be actually seen and to fulfill our role of visibility as the women, who in a weird way also the only species, I think, there's no science behind that's my thinking. I think we're the only species of, species where the women are actually ones making themselves extravagant to attract a mate. Yeah. And just recently, my boyfriend was also like, why are you women actually doing that? Like, seriously, you cannot shower for a week and we still want you, like you're a woman, that's enough. We wake up and we want woman and that's it.
Yeah.
There's not much criteria around that on a pure sexual biological level. Nevertheless, so
Mm.
we are the species where the woman dresses up for stepping into to be seen. And yet I don't know any woman who does feel inherently fully seen. After shadow work, after trauma work, yes. But before that, I feel like every single one has this like, nobody knows who I am actually. Like, and I don't feel safe to show that. And also in arguments and conversations, it's just like not being seen. So what's your take on
Yeah.
that?
It's interesting because I was at a conference last night, and obviously the culture in France and Europe is very different than North America. But, I think even so much of like just because I talk a lot about like healing the witch wound and like sisterhood wounds. And they actually said last night at the conference, like before, I don't know what year, but like probably our parents' generation, the women needed the men for financial security. So that's where that like fierce competition comes from, because it's rooted in survival. And so if you aren't like the most beautiful, then how are you gonna survive? And like my background is in theater, and I remember doing a play called Pride and Prejudice, and that's maybe an older reference, but even like this TV show Bridgerton that's on right now, it's like you see the women getting dressed up, they're going to these like soiree to get the suitor because that's gonna secure their financial future. And I never grew up like thinking that I needed a man in that way, like my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation, I was always just like fiercely independent. Like that's where like the being paid for your work, like being paid for your gifts really comes in. And I think it can be such a buzzword sometimes online, but it's like, especially when you, like for me, growing up in like an artistic, spiritual space, like our gifts were not valued in the same way. So even like making money for your creative gifts to me is something still like, I'm like, I can really make money this way.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think around like the being seen, yeah, I think that it kind of brings us to like a conversation just around like that deeper intimacy and like can someone really see your soul? Because we can see the outside, we can see the makeup, we can see the filter, but does someone really like get you as a person, like understand who you are? I think that that's a different level of intimacy for sure.
Hmm. Yes. How do you get there?
I guess it depends, like in the context of like business or relationships.
First of all, I think really within yourself, like unless
Yeah.
we are willing and curious and brave enough as well to allow to be seen by ourselves in our fullness, we cannot bring it onto the table in any other relationship.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of fear, and there's like a lot of jargons in our space around of like people not seeing their own potential, people being afraid of their own power, outsourcing the power. And I feel like this all goes hand in hand. Like the unwillingness to see yourself for who you truly are, I think really is basically the same as saying somebody's giving the power away or afraid of their own potential. What do you think?
I wonder like if it comes down to almost like the attachment theory, like if like because we're taught how to see ourselves, but we're also taught how to not see
Hmm.
ourselves. And so I think of like and I used to teach like extensively around the mother wound, but if you think of like when you're born, the mother, there's like that maternal role, and the mother either mirrors to you who you are, if they're present or not, and then that's how a baby who becomes an infant and a child then understands how do I see myself,
Hmm.
and especially like if anyone listening grew up around a narcissist, well, you're not going to learn how to see yourself because that person's never going to mirror that to you. In fact, they're going to mirror something that's different. So I think there's like a huge part of healing of like understanding, you know, what attachment style has developed, like how your parents, your immediate family perceive you, because that also makes up the perception of how you see yourself. That also was a conversation I was having with my partner because, and it came up like also last night at the conference as well. If parents like tell the kids you're you're worthy, or you're like just like positive things, and the child then like it becomes their self-image. So I think to kind of go back to like what you're saying, a lot of it comes down to the self-image, and it's how can you see yourself if you've been like rejecting yourself your whole life, or if there is pain or shame, and I think that's probably the hardest thing because it's who else, no one else can do that for you but you. Because if you've grown up not being seen, it's not because suddenly someone then sees you that your whole self-image and past gets erased. Like that's still anchored in you. And so you might find yourself attracting like relationships, friendships, romantic, where you're constantly seeking, like you want to be seen. And even when they do see you, you still can't see you. And so it becomes kind of like that codependent like tug of war.
Hmm.
I can speak about this because this like was part of my experience. And then I think it was like the Marianne Williamson quote around like some the like where the fear were greater, what is that? This quote. Our biggest fear isn't that we're inadequate, it's that we're powerful beyond measure.
Mm,
So there's also that. And I think to access that level of inner wisdom, like if you've been through trauma or any like unhealthy dynamics in life, like you almost have to go into a meditative state and like connect with higher source to access that. I hope that this
mhm,
makes sense. This is like
mhm,
going to higher levels of consciousness, but like, when you recognize like why did your soul choose this life?
mhm,
You have to
mhm,
access a different, you can't do that in like in the 3D way of thinking.
mhm.
So,
I love that. Like, I'm hearing here two layers. So, one hand, I'm hearing here the layer of attachment style, and I can totally identify with that. Like, I had exactly that happening in a past relationship where I was not able yet to see myself. I was
mm,
scared to death of my destiny, actually, and I was scared to death of surrender and of letting life really guide and lead me because you give up one hand, you give up control. And second, it's showing you so many things you truly deeply believe are not to be true. So there's like several layers of death that have to happen there for this reality to come true in yourself. And it was so wild when I had this in this relationship. Like he saw so much of my potential. He totally saw me, who I am today, and much more who I will be in 10 years, 15, 20 years, when I still thought I'm just a little pothead who's going to have a little side job, 9 to 5, and that's basically it. And the wild thing, what was happening is he mirrored that back to me in the hope that his mirror will help illuminate that shadow within myself. But what it did, it just triggered, oh, I'm not good enough. Like
yeah,
he pointing out my potential just triggered me so deeply in, I'm not good enough who I am right now. I have to fulfill that potential to be loved by him. And I can still feel there's some unprocessed pain actually happening because this is so utterly sad how our psyche then also like really twists the things around. Like this person did not depend on me fulfilling that potential. That person did not depend at all. That person was just like, let's do it together, no matter how long it takes, let's just be BFF in that. And but this not good enough created such a gap and made me realize my inner gap. And through the lack of knowledge of actionable steps, self-regulation and surrender, through lacking these tools, there was just this gap, was such a deep overwhelm that seemed non-resolvable, absolutely non-resolvable. It was like a ride or die situation. I was convinced I'm gonna die when I go into that, and facing
yeah,
that pushed me even deeper into my non-realized self, into my underdeveloped self, let's say like this, without judgment here, something at the end I needed that push back to even accelerate further forward. I personally don't believe in going back or backward steps. I always see them like whenever you have the feeling you go back, it's actually just before the sprint. You take a step back to really accelerate. Or the same when you're shooting an arrow, it's like this back to get the full force coming forward eventually. But
yeah.
yeah, it's just crazy how the psyche then works and how many protection layers are coming up to justify that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's like when we talk about like radical self honesty, I mean, it's so many of us are asleep, like even to just have that level of awareness. And then I think at the same time, like to go on like a different end of the spectrum, another conversation I've had recently is like, okay, but when do we just get to be? Like, we
Mm,
don't always have to be healing and fixing and like, shout out to Maya if she listens to this, but we were saying like because when we're so immersed in this type of growth and healing and spiritual development, like sometimes it's just nice to have a conversation and not be like, "Oh, what is that wound? What is that shadow?" It's
mm,
like, can we
mhm,
just be? Can we just be with it? And I I've actually found that like that, this might be like controversial, but for me that was really healing because I got like addicted to having to keep
Mhm.
fixing myself all the time, and
Mhm.
it kind of takes away that joy because that's not like, and it's
Yes.
such an intricate, nuanced conversation because obviously, if there's ways that you feel like you're being held back and there's space for growth, then it's like, yeah, of course you want to go towards that. But, and that's kind of, when I started off, I was saying like, helping women like smash their own glass success ceiling because it's like, it does really come down to like, we unconsciously limit ourselves in so many ways.
Hmm.
Even just like feeling safe in that, like, I don't know if you experience this, but feeling safe in the growth, safe in the success, like when things start going really, really well and you start raising that like inner thermometer to feel joy or to feel fulfilled. Like I find so often there's many discussions around like scarcity and not enoughness, but like people don't talk about like what happens when you do reach your dreams and you are making all the money and the thing that you thought you would feel or have or be isn't there. Like I just like don't hear enough of these conversations.
Yes. Yes.
Um, yeah.
I totally agree on that. Yes. And I hear you as well so much, like with both, like, hey, let's tell us, what if it all goes right? What if I go all
Yeah.
in and it's the best thing I've ever done in my life? And which, by the way, no one ever on this planet, I think, said I went all in and utterly failed. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who regrets going all in. And just yesterday or day before, yesterday, an article got again released on Forbes where they interviewed 700 ex C-suite leaders and why they became ex-leaders in 2023, why they resigned. And all of them resigned before their official before they get into time of retirement.
Hmm.
And most of them said because of the weight of regret of the things they have not done. Like they do regret things they have, like the three major regrets of these resigned C-suite leaders was a lack of depth in connection with all the people around them. The next one was a wrong decision. And the most potent one and the most common one was decisions of inaction, of not having done something. And I'm totally on that side. Like, honestly, some call it like disproportional optimism that I have, but my Sagittarius vibe is really then just like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? That I didn't do it and I regret not having done it. Like, that is the absolute worst that can happen in these situations. Nevertheless, there's one thing I want to come back to, and I just need here some cushion for my foot. And so, and so when you said like this healing addiction, and I find like I totally hear you as well here. I've been there myself. I see many people being in there in that space of self-development. And what I see is the key point to stay in self-development, but not fall into healing addiction. And I think the key here, first of all, is contentment, just being okay with being a messy human and being okay that you fuck up much more often than you do something to your expectations and just
Yeah.
accepting that as the norm. And then as well, like, I feel like this healing addiction is sourced in inability to surrender and let go because then you're still in control. And when I'm doing this healing modality, that healing modality, I am in control or like in fake control. You're still
Yeah.
not in control, but you think you're
Yeah.
in control, which pushes you really deep into the mind instead of being relaxed in yourself, in your nature. And
Yeah.
and the thing is, when you let that go, you still do your self development, but you do it from a place of ease. Like,
Yeah.
I just recently had this hypnosis and it was amazing. And I just came across it and things just aligned. It's literally
Yeah.
like this. Like, I didn't look for it. I knew this is a part in my life I need to work on. And we worked on money mindset. And I knew I still have some wounds that I didn't clean up and I need to work on. But it was not like, oh, how can I resolve my money mindset? Da, da, da. It was really just like, when the time is right, it will come to me. And it just
Yeah.
came to me and it just happened and it was unexpected and it was awesome and fabulous and had beautiful fruits coming from that. But it was really, and I think this is also a big part of the law of attraction. Leaning
Yep.
back, letting the things happen doesn't mean we become still and don't do anything. Like, especially in work, like just leaning back and letting money come to you, it doesn't work like this. You just still have to
Yeah.
put the work in. But yeah, I feel like so this really us not wanting to surrender is the core root cause of healing addiction. That's what I personally think.
Yeah. I feel like a lot, I think it's so much of it is like, it just all comes back to that like not enoughness or like not feeling worthy because it's like you can't heal yourself into feeling worthy. Like it's like you already
Mm,
are worthy and it's more about like the belief system. I mean, like, and again, this is like controversial, but I've manifested amazing things while in the depths of hell. Like,
mm,
when they like, obviously vibrationally speaking, I mean, I think there even is science to back this. Like, if you're vibing at a higher level, obviously you're going to attract things at a different level. But I mean, you can still manifest money and, you know, prosperity, if you will, when like things aren't going that well. But
mhm.
I think it becomes it's almost like a paradox because obviously the more you heal, the more you release these like conditional layers. So the more you're going to see the world in a different way and then attract different things. So in some ways it's like yes, you can heal to access that, but in other ways like also I mean there's many wounded successful people on
Mhm.
this planet.
Yes,
It's
yes,
like
yes.
so
I
I've
just
always
recently, yeah,
yeah.
I just recently heard from Alex Hormozi this wonderful, wonderful example of like they checked with rats in the lab. And so the one test group just had the cheese in front of their cage. How fast are they running and how strong are they pulling? They attach like a feather or something to them. And no, I'm not propagating animal testing. I need to clearly say that here. Yet the results are really interesting, what came out from that. And so, and now I'm having like, shit, am I quoting animal testing? Do I propagate no animal testing? Okay, but that's another ethical question. Back to the
Mm.
example. So the rat with the cheese in front, yeah, was running pretty fast and pretty strong. So it was determined to get that cheese. Now they had a rat with the cheese in front and the smell of cat behind them. Yes.
Oh.
That rat was running even faster. And then they had a test group with just the smell of the cat behind. And these were, interestingly, the fastest rats and the strongest and the most enduring. So this shows that high vibration and reward is very, very potent. High
Yeah.
reward or high vibration in combination with the pain and an insecurity and a not good enoughness you're running away from is even stronger, but only that is actually the strongest. And it's the same like the frog in the butter, right? That's like trying to paddle out and turns it into butter eventually because he's not giving up. And it's like his survival. Like we are so strong in
Yeah.
hell, we are so,
Yeah.
so strong. And I agree with you. Like, I
Mm.
don't, I think it's really like an attachment of us for all pleasant things and actually an avoidance strategy. I personally think, because eventually life is up and down, and life, you will have rock bottoms, several. And if you only have
Yeah.
one, then you never made it out of it. And
Yeah.
that's just sad reality of human life, but it is what it is. So this need for an optimal, perfected high vibration to get what you want, I feel is just another shadow or an aspect of how
Yeah.
our society is trimmed of like, you women, you gotta show up every day, simply perfect, but not too much, you know? And yeah, it's just this like red thread of human weirdness that's coming through.
I remember hearing this a while back, but it just came up when you were speaking that like success is a trauma response
Hmm.
and or like ambition is a trauma response. And I have like two kind of anecdotes that are like unrelated, but but related because it's so, that analogy you gave, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. Like that's the thing is that a lot of people who have experienced trauma have like a different drive than maybe someone who had just like a very stable, normal life. Like they might not have that fire or that fuel. And like I used to be a competitive dancer and a performer. And so like my body was my instrument and I probably consciously and also just being in my 20s like I was very very fit, but I also was in like a pure state of trauma and hustling and trying to prove my worthiness and make it, and you're doing auditions and you're constantly being judged and you're just never fucking good enough in that industry anyways like even if you're wildly talented. And something really interesting happened because in my late 20s when I stopped performing, I gained so much weight, and it took me the longest time to realize that I gained the weight when my body and mind finally felt safe to just fucking chill because I
Mhm.
wasn't like all the time. And I had to like, and then I was thinking like, it's obvious like we're talking about visibility, right? Obviously, this bringing in like body like issues here, but I was like, I don't have the drive. I don't have the drive to be thin the way that I
Mhm.
used to be. Like I don't have a reason. And
Mhm.
so that's why I'm like the success is a trauma response because I could, and obviously when you're on stage dancing, like your body, this wasn't like exotic dancing. This was like jazz, ballet.
Mhm.
But you're like that's like a very harsh world because it's all about
Mhm.
basically how thin you are, like how fit you are. But I also felt like the same a little bit in my business once I like crossed this infamous 100,000 that everyone talks about. I was kind of like, is that it? And then I felt myself just being like, I don't want to. Like I've actually been grappling this, I think, for like a year and a half. I'm like, do I have to be ambitious? Do I have to like, because we're in this girl boss era, do I have to now aspire
Mhm.
to be a millionaire? Like I have thought about this so much and I'm like, maybe I just want to be. Maybe I
Mhm.
just want to make 100,000 a year and like can't that be good enough? Why do we have to keep, you know? And then I can hear voices like, "Oh, well, you're not ambitious enough," or like, "You're not,"
Mhm.
and it's like it's still
You're
just
scared to
like
fail, all the things, you're just not admitting it because yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I
Or
hear
like you're
you.
not going for your highest potential. And it's like, but, but then I'm like, maybe I don't want to.
Yes, because there's still this narrative. If you think because I'm not going for seven figures, that means I'm not going for my highest potential. That means you're
Yeah.
still attaching your worth, your potential, your self-expression on an external reward system of money.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe your highest potential is just to be a content mom. Maybe your highest
Yeah.
potential is just to have a handful of chicken and a cow. That's mine. I know that. And all I'm doing is to get
Yeah.
that, And so maybe we really just have to still step back and stop attaching our
Yeah.
self-worth and our identity and purpose onto how society rewards that and stepping into how is my inner feeling in my nervous system rewarding that actually.
Yeah. I feel like too, I don't know, for anyone like for you, but for anyone listening, like I feel like the 20s is such a decade of like you have to prove yourself. And I feel like when you enter your 30s, it's like you just don't care anymore. And I can
Yeah.
only imagine in the 40s, it's like, pfft, like
Yeah.
also don't care. You just want to like live a good quality life, do things that you love, go on vacation, like whatever. Just, and I say this like also coming like, from the when I say like success as a trauma response, because I grew up in a family that was like first of all, highly traumatized, but also very ambitious. So like that was like a learned thing for me. So for me to step back, it's almost rebellious. And actually, I was a scapegoat in the family. I like in my earlier like in my when I was a kid, I very much underperformed,
Mm.
almost as like a like because I saw the way my family like mentally put themselves through hell to succeed. And I always equated success as like mental chaos. And then guess what
Mm,
happened? When I crossed my first six figures, actually when I was 20, that was the most unhappy and dysregulated and toxic I had ever been in my life because I just worked. And I
mhm,
was so, and that, and again, to go back to my statement in the beginning, like helping women feel fulfilled because it's not just like, there's so many people that are like, make the money, be successful. But it's like, yeah, that is a value of mine. But also being fulfilled and being happy, not to sound like a huge millennial, because we're all like, we just want to be happy. But like, it is, yeah. Like, would you, would you rather like be on your deathbed and I think it's like the regret of the dying. Like I've experienced a lot of death this year, and it's just kind of looking like it's a bit morbid, but you start really reevaluating like your values and the way that you want to show up, and the way that you want to use your gifts, and even like I know we were kind of talking about this before, but even the way I show up online, like I have pulled back so much from I actually feel sometimes, and this is again the background of like being a writer and a performer, like it's natural for me to like share my life, my wisdom, whatever. But I feel like I got to the point where I was like, why am I like exploiting my life to
mhm,
build this business?
mhm,
And I had to like, because it was affecting my mental health.
mhm.
Like I hit so many frustrations in the past like 2 years, and I was like, I'm just like, and it's not a visibility fear, it's just like I don't need to share this with people. Like this is sacred,
Mhm.
this is for me.
Mhm.
I just went on a huge side tangent there.
I love
But
that. And I'm glad we're there because this was like my first intention of interviewing you for. And was exactly that. Like, one hand, we live in this world where I think it's beautiful that we have the power by just showing up who we are with our flaws to positively impact people. And I feel like, especially as people who are like confident in their own skin and learned to accept their human messiness, aka people who are in their 30s now, I totally
mm,
agree on that with you. And then we have the others who are like, going to beauty doctors, estheticians with a filter, with an image of themselves, with an Instagram or TikTok filter on, like, make me like that. Like, this is
wow.
happening in our world. Or people comparing themselves with, I don't know, with completely medically organized and regulated people. People putting their different psychopharmaca into the bio as a form of self-identification, all these things. So I feel like it's almost my responsibility and duty to be like, hey, you can be human. That's all right. We all are. And it's totally all right. Not only right, it's welcome. Yeah. To create
Mm,
that space of welcomeness. Yet on the other hand, and then I also see as well, like how people lose hope in themselves. I'm like, hey, I've been through the same and you can make it out. So these are the parts where I really love sharing my story, my authenticity. Yet on the other hand, I really feel the same like you. Like I'm done exploiting my
mm,
life, especially when it comes to real life content creation, like document instead of create. I'm like, I'm tired of
yeah.
documenting my life. I just want to live my life. And that's why I'm batching content. I hire a videographer and photographer. We go shoot twice or three times a year. Yeah. And then we simply go for it. And I have my content already. 1 second. My partner comes home. I need to open the door, the door for my dogs.
No worries.
I know, I know. So I have one very impatient corgi with the short legs, and then she's stumping the door like this. And like, how can you lift your arms so high? I don't understand. Yeah. And so I'm really tired of, first of all, simply physically tired to have a nice, picturesque, romantic moment in my life and
Mm,
destroy it with a phone. Because honestly, and Picnic is super picturesque, but in picnic with somebody making selfies all the time or setting up a tripod across is not picturesque no more. It
Mhm.
is really interfering in the true nature. And then even
Yeah.
more, that's where I really want to dive in with you is this. I
Mm.
feel everybody really just deserves integrity and privacy.
Yeah.
And I feel like I also deserve this deep privacy I don't share with anybody. There's parts in me, there's parts of my story, my life, my
Yeah.
personality I don't even share with my partner because it's so sacred. I don't want to put them into words or into manifestation because this would really change the deep, profound, transcendental character. And and then beyond that, and then also just your past. Dirty, nasty past that was utterly painful. Like, do we need to live that on repeat? I feel everybody
Yeah.
deserves to close a chapter, put it into the into their own library, and let it get dusted and tooted up. I think everybody
Yeah.
deserves that. So, what's your take on that? Because you are also coaching women to show up
Yeah.
with their story and tell their story, to inspire and to be paid. So,
Yeah.
give me your everything in that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, with like the documentation, it's kind of like a catch-22 for me because I do work in film and photography, so I also literally capture these moments and like my brain does think that way. So to start saying to myself, no, I'm not going to capture this moment. I'm just going to live it in real time and not capture it. Like that's been because the film, that's such a part of my identity. Like
Mm,
that's just one of my I'm very visual. So it's a weird thing to be like, I'm gonna take a step back from this or be more intentional about, which is actually why I started a personal Instagram this year, which I have to say has been phenomenal because I had my business one and I had so many people from my entire life that were never going to be clients of mine or buy from me.
mm,
And that was really tripping up my visibility. But to the story aspect, I think it always just comes down to what's the intention for sharing and whether or not, like, we have this thing called neuro mirrors. So when we're sharing, like, I know there's a whole conversation around like energy, but if you're tapped in and intuitive, like without judgment, but just energetically, you can feel when someone's posting something and they're just wanting to be witnessed. Now, could that also be our own projection because we just see the world through our own lens?
mm,
Absolutely. I happen to be a projector in human design, so I'm like, I really, really like see this when I like scan people's content. But it's also one of my gifts around like helping see the truth. Like I can see people's wounds in the way that they're expressing themselves. So maybe that's just my brain and like I can see these things. But I think it comes down to the intention of like, why are you sharing it? And that's what I teach in storytelling is that it's not to exploit your own story for the sake of you being witnessed. There are times, there are spaces, there are even speaking events, there are women's circles, there are places that you can share your story and be witnessed by other women and heal. When you're doing it like in the context of your business, then I would say there's a little bit more intentionality around like what are you sharing. And so I like to help people bring it back to like, well, the story is actually the support. Like when you're sharing a story, you're actually sharing a message. The story is just helping people go from
mm.
this belief to this belief, and the story just like fills in the gaps. And so I really try and help women see like it's not about getting into the nitty-gritty details. It's you don't have to go, and again, but it's this is intentional. Like I spoke on stage in November at November is Violence Against Women Prevention Month worldwide, and I shared some of my story about the abuse that I went through growing up. And I actually specifically chose, there's one aspect of the story that was quite graphic that I described the violence. not too much because again, I was conscious of the audience and that can be triggering for people. But I also, as a storyteller, like, because it's one thing to say, I don't know, I'm just using like a basic phrase, like I was hit. That might not like, but choosing the
Mhm.
details of what you share, like it has to be intentional. I did give like a trauma, or what do you call that? Like a disclaimer warning when I like went on stage and spoke about that, but it was really important because storytelling is cathartic. Like we're bringing someone on a journey, and the message I was sharing at that event was around stopping the cycle of abuse. Like it starts with us. It's up to us. Like it's not going to be like we have to be aware of it. And if I had just gone on stage and said, "Okay, we all need to stop abusing each other," well, there would be no effect. But I
Mhm.
actually shared my story and how it went from, my grandparents to my parents to me to, and that's, when you're bringing people on that journey. But I also think storytelling, specifically in the context of your business, it's not even just, it's about using stories to illustrate a point. Like anything in personal growth or spiritual development, we're teaching these concepts. And so when we talk about concepts, we're in our cognitive brain. But when we can use stories, even like, I'm thinking of like, I forget the word, but there's like these fables in
Fairy
France, or just
tales.
like
Yeah.
fairy tale. Yeah, like even just things like that. It's like we use the story to illustrate the main point.
Mm.
And so I think we can find ways of sharing our teachings and our knowledge and our experiences without feeling like, because if we're sharing something that doesn't feel in consent, like I like to really tune in somatically. Um, you know, am I feeling like a weight on my shoulders? Or is my mouth getting really dry? Or even sometimes like just losing your voice. Like, I don't know if this ever
Mhm.
happened to you, just like randomly lose your voice because it's like, it's, I think it's important to, we kind of talked about this on Instagram, but being in a space where it's going to be well received. And especially when you're sharing like intimate details. And so if you write like a personal memoir and you're going on a book tour, well, you're going to have like people who love you and receive you in that. But if you're just sharing a chapter on TikTok or Instagram where it is just like the wild, wild west, and
Mm.
people are just going to be, they're just going to say, like, you have to protect yourself. I don't think that we should be bleeding all over the internet. I think that like when you're sharing, if you're sharing in the context of business, to like really, really feel grounded in what you're sharing. And the last thing I'll say on this, or not the last thing, but I went live on Facebook this week and I was sharing about the biggest business investment gone wrong debacle, one of those like burned by the industry things. But this was like, it happened 6 years ago now. I have like zero emotion attached to that story. Like I can tell that story now because it's just neutral. But 4 years ago, even 3 years ago, I was still wounded. I couldn't tell that story without getting activated. So
Mhm.
to speak to what you were saying, like somatically, like we have to be, it really requires us to face our own truth. Do you know what I mean? To like then feel grounded enough to go and share it with someone else. Like it requires us to look at our life in different angles because how what meaning are we attaching to these things? And this is like the deeper work that I actually do with clients. I'm not just like, okay, what story can we tell so you can make
Mm.
10 grand? Like I just can't handle that type of like,
Mhm.
it's
Because this
just,
then is exploitation, really. Like, doesn't matter
yeah,
what it does to you. Let's just let's just cut down these trees, and monetize. Like, it feels so much harm
yeah,
done, and yeah, especially to the people sharing, so much
yeah,
harm done eventually because there is a thing of oversharing, which is also in trauma response, and and lack of boundaries. And the sad thing is, especially when we share sensitive stories of boundary violation, then oversharing that even more reinforces your boundaries are worthless and hopeless to
Yeah.
establish, actually. So I hear you. And I love how you like now really gave here the context of what, how does a story feel to you? And and using the parts to not monetize your story, but using
Mm.
your story to help others go from A to B.
Yeah.
I love that. Like, yeah, to make the belief tangible and in the subconscious as well, through image, through symbolism that just happens in real life in storytelling. I love that.
Yeah. Well, and so much of it too is about I like our story is our identity. So to give you like a really good example, like I experienced childhood abuse, but I don't want to, if I identify and say, oh, I'm a survivor, like that could be very controversial when
Hmm.
people say, like, I'm a survivor. And some people are like, I don't want, no, I am human. That's also controversial, but it just comes down to like,
Hmm.
well, how do you identify? Because if you keep
Hmm.
telling the same story, your identity is anchored in
Hmm.
that story.
Hmm.
And so that's just something like I say to clients, and I mean even to myself, to just be aware of that you're not perpetuating
Hmm.
because it can perpetuate unconscious victimhood.
Hmm.
And
And disable again to be seen. Like with this, I'm
yeah,
again taking another layer that just prevents me and others to see greater aspects of myself. Because you are not a victim. You are just a human being in an experience, basically. Yeah. I mean, this is now
yeah,
very rationally boiled down. It has layers and stages of experience
yeah,
and going through that. But as I say, especially the perpetuation, it's okay to like be in a state of victimhood or in a state of perpetrator, but and in a state of the savior. But after a while, just be, I'm actually none of them. Who am I beyond that event? And I feel like
yeah.
this is like also the biggest part that I see with my people. Like I used to work closely with people with PTSD together. Now I'm just having it as a small part of my work to make the
Mm.
feminine health trauma informed. But before that, I saw so many people, they generally did not want to heal because they did not want to become their greatest self. They were still scared to fully realize their own powers and nature and actually enjoyed almost lingering in that sense of stuck in that story. And
Yeah.
which is really sad because this is also like because the trauma is still stuck in the body. But before we become like, I want to be myself again, I'm
Mm.
curious, I'm ready, the physical work barely does anything, actually, the somatic work, sadly. There needs to be like this, yeah, we need to open the key, the lock here.
Hmm. Well, and I think like I've talked extensively about this, and it's also one of those paradoxes because it's like sharing from the wisdom, not the wound.
Mm,
And at the same time, it's important to be discerning because everyone, even if they're sharing their authentic story and experience and their message, like that might not be the right message for someone. Like we have to like, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, we also were talking about this last night, but for example, like everyone in my whole life told me it's so hard to find an apartment in Paris because it's a big competitive city, French bureaucracy, blah, blah. And I heard that. I heard people's stories and experiences, and their experiences are real. And then that became my story. So
mm,
it took me years to move to Paris because I was like, I'll never find a place to live.
mm-hmm,
And I won't tell the story here because it's too long, but we'll just say that I manifested this home I'm in under 2 weeks. And I didn't have to do any of the paperwork. And no, this isn't a conversation about privilege and XYZ. It was just like, it was a different experience, right? But for like 5 years, so we have to be discerning about people are sharing wisdom, but they're also coming through their lens. And they're
mm-hmm,
not always in the at the highest, like integrity is not the right word, but
They're not selfless in their story.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like there's
Or
always a
objective
bias.
even. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, and then that's also something like I like to help my clients see. That's where it's like, yeah, like I help my clients build their business, blah, blah, blah. But it's like I'm really helping, like it's almost like life and spiritual coaching because I'm helping them see a different aspect of their story so that they can then share it in the most
Mm-hmm.
empowered way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because it's like not something that I sell that way because people like, but when I'm having those conversations, like I had a client um in the past like 6 months, and she used to work in the sex industry, and she like there was a part of her story that I was like, okay, but there's something here. Like, I'm sensing that you have like some shame around this because there was something in her story that she didn't want to share. So it was coming out a bit like distorted. And we had to like really go back and just heal some of those
Mm-hmm.
aspects around having that past. Doesn't mean that she then shared that on social media, but it's for
Mm-hmm.
herself. It's for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves to reconcile with so that we can
Mm-hmm.
show up and be visible and not feel we're like, it's almost like you're showing up and you're like, don't see this one part of me,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's like
Yes. And I had
integration.
that. Yes, I also totally had that. Like before I started becoming visible in the online space or in the public or beyond this tiny little space of an island here, I was scared to do that because I really had this fear, oh my God, if people will see me there, they will Google or whatever and find out this and that about me. And now I'm like, yeah, okay, what fucking ever. So better Google your own
Yeah.
past, like, you know. But this was
Yeah.
such a present fear that kept me in captivity and in a frozen nervous system for years, 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 and years, simply because I was scared people will find out about all the things I did when I was young, you know. Now I realize, like, oh, that's just stuff people do when they're young, like, you
Yeah.
know. But I really needed to heal that part. Yes.
Yeah. When I think too, it's like one of the four agreements.
Mm,
I think
I
something
love
that
that
had
book.
really, yeah, something that really set me free was just recognizing like because we put so much weight on people's opinions of us. Like we put our security, our sense of self, our sense of belonging in what people think of us. And when you realize
Hmm.
that what people think of us is just a mirror of what they think of themselves, it has nothing to
Hmm.
do with us.
Hmm.
And so again, like, and now when people make like, if I hear like a judgmental comment, I'm just like, here's a mirror.
Hmm.
Like they're not actually saying that to me. They're saying that to themselves. And when you realize
Hmm.
that it's actually not about you, then you don't really fear that.
Hmm.
You don't have those fears anymore. I mean, I'm not trying to like polish over this and say like it's not, it's obviously a real thing. It can be painful, but I've just kind of had to let go of like, you know, not letting what people think of me matter, which is,
Yes.
when you grow up in abuse and bullying and all of that, like that was my sense of self. So that is for me, that's been like my own rebellion is just like
Hmm.
nothing that anyone says to you has anything to do with you.
Hmm. 100% agree. Like hurt people hurt. And that's
Yeah.
sadly it. And what I'm practicing also now is when I feel towards a reaction or an encounter to a person and I can feel anger or frustration or resentment coming up, I go on a walk, like this is my meditation on my walk to move things around inside until I can just have compassion for them. Really, in the
Yeah.
sense, not of this, "Ah, I forgive you sense, but really of this, like, oh, actually, wow, you must have experienced this and that you
Yeah.
do this and that. And then really be like, I'm sorry you experienced that. And I'm sorry you didn't find the help you need to heal that yet. And
Yeah.
and what really helps me to forgive people who hurt other people intentionally, unintentionally, there's no difference for me. Like in my world, you cannot hurt somebody intentionally. Even if you hurt somebody intentionally, means you have such a great subconscious agenda of protecting yourself. that is causing you to intentionally, consciously do that. And I don't believe we are consciously capable of hurting other beings. And so
Mm.
even there, then it's really like, and what's like the thing that always works for me to learn to forgive somebody is then imagine to have to go to bed or lie on deathbed with having done these things. And that's a big thing for me. Like, wow, everybody should be able to sleep and die in peace. And like, I really hope you find it until then. I really wish you find that healing that you need. And that really
Yeah.
helps me to move on and over that and not take it personal and not take it resentful, especially.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, yeah, it can be tough to receive that feedback. Because I think if that was said to me when I was in my early 20s, I wouldn't have been able to receive it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I mean,
But
I'm not telling the people. That's the work I'm
yeah.
doing inside myself, but I get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But sometimes like we can have like people can be those messengers and those
Mm,
mirrors to us. Like, yeah, I was also talking about this with a friend, like sometimes when you just get like feedback from people and then it creates like self-awareness. Like you don't realize like that you're, I don't know, being overbearing or whatever the thing is, right?
mhm,
But it goes back to that self, like radical self honesty, like
mhm,
because we can only be as honest as we allow ourselves to see,
mhm,
and we can live in that denial. So
mhm.
it's also intricate.
It is. Oh, I love it. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel really rich in this conversation right now. I feel
Hmm.
perfectly filled and not too much, not too little. I'm trying to also practice the 70% eating rule these days. I hear it from so many places, like on Netflix in these Blue Zone documentary. They said, you should only eat like 70% full. And also in the Bhagavad
Oh,
Gita, they say that one third is for food, one third is for the soul, and one third is to be left free and to have space for prayers to the divine.
wow.
And that made so much sense for me because when you leave a little bit, when you completely stuff yourself full, then you're just like, oh, there's no
Yeah.
space and consciousness left. And so I'm practicing that right now physically, but also mentally and with work and emotionally with all kinds of things to learn to stop before I'm oversaturated. It's a big
I
one.
love that.
Yeah.
See, this is like a message. I feel like I needed to hear that.
Beautiful. Well, in that sense, is there anything else you want to share with us?
No, I also feel really complete.
Beautiful. Wow, happy ass complete with 60%. No,
Yes.
70%. Beautiful.
Thank
I
you
love
so
that.
much for having me on. This was so
Mm.
fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And please let us know how can we work with you and how can we find you. In that moment, I went down to 1%. I quickly have to plug in. And in that
Ooh,
time, please tell our people how to find you, how to work with you.
okay. So my website is untamedrevolution.com. I am on Facebook and Instagram. My Instagram is I am Brittany Hammond. And yeah, if you're in Paris and want to do anything, film, photography, I have a story mentorship, story alchemy, signature story, and then just different ways to work one to one with me. And I host a lot of different types of like monthly workshops. I have an online shop with access to all of the amazing workshops and master classes I've done before. So just reach out.
Beautiful. You will also definitely find the links in the show notes below. And so you can reach out to Brittany and you can reach out to me as well. And I hope you really loved and enjoyed the episode and the different nuggets as much as I did. And I think Brittany did, judging by her smile. And please let us know in the comments below, like, what nugget was really the needle moving and a change for you? And feel free to share it with your family and friends. This is gold in the online space. So if you enjoyed this just a tiny little bit, we would be really, really grateful for you 5 seconds to either share or like or comment something below. That is really gold. And that being said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Brittany. It was the greatest pleasure to be having you here.
Bisous from Paris.
And I don't know what we give in Thailand. Like, they don't touch, they don't give kisses, no.